Well, I want to start by just telling you a little bit about my background in ministry so that you kind of have an idea of where I'm coming from. My work for God's kingdom in the U.S. has always been ministry to women, and for 35 years or so I've taught and trained women to study the Bible and trained leaders as well, and then helped these leaders to be better discussion leaders. So during that time, my role changed and I became what's called an area advisor, which just means I traveled to different classes to help the teaching leaders there to be better teachers of Scripture and better at training leaders. And that was a great privilege. All of it was a great privilege. I think maybe the greatest privilege of my life to teach Scripture. I don't think there's any bigger job or better job that a person can have than to be able to teach Scripture to people who want to learn it. I mean, wow, that is really a great place to be. So my husband was actually my greatest encourager, and when I was asked to take on this very demanding role, which he might have said, no, that's too much, but he said, I wondered how long it would take them to figure out that you were the right person for the job. That was his encouragement to me. It was really sweet, and I think that helped me more than anything to know that my husband had faith in me and wanted to see me develop into the best that I could be. So that was huge for me. And then I spoke as well to my pastor and asked if that was something that he thought was a right thing for me. And he agreed with my husband that that was a good place for me to use my God-given gifts. So I'm really grateful that God gave me this provision, because I think systematic and personal Bible study is how we grow. And of course there are other things that are along with that, but that is really the bedrock foundation. And as I applied it to my life, I found that I became a better wife, a better mother, I think a better woman in general than I would have been otherwise. And I hope that the women that I trained, and that as I taught these women, that they also found the differences in their life. And on the first trip that I made to the forum, the very first trip, I found myself at a table one evening with some Eastern Europeans. And toward the end of the dinner, I asked one of the men if he had a women's Bible study at his church. And he said, oh, yes, he did. And I said, well, do you know what they're studying right now? And he said, well, they come on Monday morning and ask me questions about the sermon. Oh, now see, that's the reaction I kind of expect. It's sort of like, oh, but sometimes you don't get that reaction. People just think, well, yeah, but to me, that isn't a personal or systematic Bible study. They're not personally involved in it. And so I said, well, I thought, Lord, how can I respond to that? So I said, have you ever noticed that there is a woman or maybe two women in the group that really love the Scripture that maybe you could train to become teachers for you for that Bible study? And he said, oh no, only the pastor teaches. And so that really has been what has prompted me through the years to see about training women and as teachers of other women. And a lot has changed in Europe in the intervening years, I know. And so that's a really good thing. But last year, when I was at ELF, I was speaking about my ministry to women in the foundational discipleship group. And I told that story. And I thought I'd get that response of, oh, but instead it was just totally silent. Like that was, it was all women, the section I was working with, but they didn't think that was unusual, that's what the Bible study for women was like. And I thought, wow, there are still elements of that. Almost 20 years later, it hasn't changed everywhere yet. So I was surprised that there were evidently so many churches in Europe that was the case. So having thought and prayed about this, it seems like a kind of a waste of a workforce in the church. And it's definitely a lack of development of women and women leaders especially. So I like to give a few thoughts today to training women to teach the Bible to other women. It advances Bible literacy. It allows pastors to put their greater attentions on other things. And it also gives opportunity for women to grow and be matured in their own personal Bible study. I read an article written by Jan Wilkin, who is a Bible teacher, wonderful Bible teacher in the U.S., and she made this point. You need women in your church workforce. You may be the best preacher on the planet, but God wouldn't have gifted women to teach unless their teaching were absolutely necessary to the spiritual well-being of the women in your church. You need her help, end quote. So that's, we're going to be looking at why a pastor needs women to teach other women the Bible. And the first reason that I would give you is that a woman is an example that a pastor cannot be. When a woman sees someone who looks like her and sounds like her, teaching the Bible with passion and with intelligence, she begins to recognize that she too can love God with her mind, and perhaps beyond what she even thought necessary or possible. I was a brand new Christian in a women's Bible study years and years ago, and I heard a woman teaching. It was really, I think it was at a women's retreat rather than a Bible study. And as I listened to this woman teach, I thought, I want to be like her. I want to know Scripture. I want to know how to apply it to my life. And it inspired me to study and to really look at the marginal references and cross-referencing things and finding how the Gospels were similar, but where the differences were. And it just really compelled me to study Scripture after seeing a woman who knew what she knew. Women who only hear men handle the Bible well sometimes forget to consider themselves capable of doing the same thing. So women benefit from seeing a smart, diligent woman set an example of what it means to teach the Bible with reverence and skill. A second reason that a pastor needs women is that I almost skipped right over it. A woman brings a perspective that a man doesn't have. When men teach, they naturally draw on examples that resonate with men. This means that women who exclusively hear male teaching will be offered a fair number of testosterone-laden illustrations from a male perspective. And that's fine. I actually prefer listening to a man teach rather than a woman most of the time. I take notes, I look for applications in my life, but part of studying as a woman has showed me that when I listen to anyone teach Scripture, I look for the structure of the message. I listen for word definitions. I admire a great illustration. I'm hungry for the applications. And some of that comes out of learning to do my own study of Scripture. But I also really enjoy hearing a good woman speaker, teacher, who speaks the language of not just what the Scripture teaches to all, but illustrating from a woman's perspective the ideas of homemaking and child rearing, and what it is to be single and not married, and what it is to have a balance of home and ministry and work. She can draw a few different observations from the text than a man might. And this is not to say she would feminize a text, but that she will not feminize it, but emphasize those elements that highlight the role of women in the redemptive history and speak to issues that women commonly face. Years back, I was writing a workshop to give here at the Forum that had to do with women characters in the Bible, long ago, nearly 20 years ago. And one of the subjects that I was including was fear. And the person from Scripture I was using was Esther. And I took all my materials when I had it all put together to Greg Pritchard to look through. And he said, why are you putting Esther in here and fear? And I said, well, I really think fear and what happened in her life will resonate with women. And this talk is for women, about women of the Bible. And he said, well, I really had to kind of convince him that I felt like Esther needed to stay in the talk. And as it worked out, that was the part of the lecture that most resonated with the women. It sparked the discussion that was the most interesting. They really loved commenting on and then sharing their own experiences about fear. And as a woman, I had a sense about my own fears that gave me an understanding of what my audience would need to hear. And I'm not sure, after listening to Greg, that a man would have taken that perspective. So that really is an illustration of what we've been talking about. A third reason that pastors need women to teach women is that a woman holds a position of authority over women that a man cannot. Now, certainly men have positions of authority, but there is a part of a woman teacher that she has a different authority. Let me explain. A woman can tell other women to beware of making idols in their careers or their families in a way that a man can't. A woman can address women on vanity, pride, submission, and contentment in a way that I don't believe a man can. She has an empathetic authority over women and the ability to say, I understand the besetting sins and trials of womanhood, and I can tell you that God is faithful to his promises. So she's teaching something from that perspective. I'm shepherding a young woman right now who I just recently talked to about 1 Peter. And the verses we looked at, you're familiar with these verses, 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. And then 5b through 6, they submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. When was the last time you heard that taught by a man from the pulpit? I always sense really discomfort when a man teaches that it makes him uncomfortable, not to mention the women who are listening. Well, the last phrase of that said, to do what is right and not give way to fear. Only another woman can speak to the fear that a woman has when she submits to her husband, that God will use it in her husband's life to help him to respond biblically. We resist giving up control. We think we're not going to be taken seriously and that we're not respected. A woman who teaches the whole counsel of Scripture to other women are going to find the time to confront the sins that they might resent a man addressing at all. She can say things like, and hear this the way I mean it, she can say, monthly hormones are not an excuse for murder and rage. So, a man can't say that to a group of women, but a woman can. A woman can teach what submission looks like in the life of a woman better than another woman. I'm not saying that right. There may be no one who can teach what submission looks like in the life of a woman better than another woman who's learned to live it, who's actually learned it and lived it. It's probably only a woman who can teach that our ministry to our husbands needs to be one of tenderness and selflessness and sacrificial love, and get a willing response from the women, because if it comes from a man, it sounds self-serving and it might backfire with resentment. But coming from a woman, it sounds different. Fourth reason, A woman sees needs that a pastor may not see. In the week-to-week contact in her ministry, a woman teacher is going to gain the feel of the pulse of the women in her group that a man might not. You know, if a man can't really even figure out the mystery of his own wife, he's not going to be able to have the idea of what the women in his church are feeling and thinking. And so not all women, though, are meant to be Bible teachers, any more than all men are suited for the work. Many women see the benefits in their character and their lives as they see Scripture and study it, but only some are gifted by God to teach the deep truths of Scripture. If I have, say, a group of 10 women in a Bible study, I'll find that maybe 1 or 2 in a group of 10 that really love to dig into Scripture and love it and enjoy it and love how it all fits together and love to look, really navigate their Bibles well. 1 or 2 in 10. And then there are usually 5 or 6 maybe who just love to be there because they know that the study of the Word changes how they live. They know that the study of the Word helps them to be better moms or better wives, and they aren't really so interested in digging. They just want to know for the day, what do I need to learn today? And then there are usually 2 or so, or 3 maybe, that really are just there for the social value. They come because they want to be with other women, they want to laugh and talk and enjoy it, and you know what? That's okay. We want them to just keep coming back because the study of the Word is going to be good for everybody, and then they progress from there. So we just want to keep them coming back. God changes us as we are involved, and He's going to grow all who come and study. So a couple of years ago, I was in the Foundational Discipleship Network when there was a speaker from an Eastern European country who was developing his point, and he asked the room, there must have been 45 people or so in the room. He said, "Who is the oldest woman in the room?" I thought, this guy is courageous. I mean, asking which woman I raised my hand. I said, I think I'm probably the oldest in the room. And so he was trying to make a point. And so he asked me personally, he said, if you had a group of 3 women, would you rather teach them how to bake a cake, or would you rather teach them how to study the Bible? He didn't know who he was talking to. And I said, I would much rather teach them the Bible. And he was like, he was so surprised because somebody from my generation, he thought a woman of my generation would say, I would much rather teach them to bake a cake. Well, I don't have anything against teaching women to bake cakes. I love to bake and cook. I love to entertain in my home. And I love the women's ministry that is called Titus 2, where older women are teaching the younger women. And they want them to teach how to be reverent and love their husbands and children. It's a great ministry. It's a wonderful ministry. But many women want to know the whole counsel of God. Sure, the cooking and the baking and being in the home, and those are all great things, but the whole counsel of God, and they want to teach it to other women. So all women are going to benefit from studying the Bible. Well, so far we've talked about why pastors need women teachers. Now I'm going to change the subject. Now I'm going to talk about why women Bible teachers need their pastor. Now, you might assume that women teachers naturally find places to develop and exercise their gifts, but this isn't always true, even in the United States, and it's perhaps less likely here in Europe. Now, in that article that Jen Wilkins wrote about women as Bible teachers, she makes the point that there are ways for a pastor to nurture the work of talented women. The first one is that a woman Bible teacher needs her pastor to affirm her. And you may remember that I spoke of going to see my pastor when I was asked to teach, and how he encouraged me to do it. I would never have had the courage to go for it if my pastor hadn't taken me seriously. And hearing his encouragement and knowing that I had his support really did spur me on, as well as having my husband say the same thing. A second reason is that a woman teaching Scripture she needs a pastor to sharpen her. And as you probably know, a woman teacher tends to have fewer opportunities to develop her gifting under sound leadership because of the constraints of work or family. Very few women get to go to seminary, although that's changing. Few get to have degrees in Bible. So a woman needs her pastor to meet her more than halfway. She needs her pastor to help her shape her theology when she has questions, to point her to good commentaries or podcasts, maybe to gently critique her, and to help her with difficult texts if she has questions. I believe she would need a pastor to offer before she asks, offer to be her help if she needs it, and that a pastor should not assume that she will flourish without your help. A third reason is a woman teaching the Scripture needs a pastor to provide a covering for her. Now, I know you wouldn't let just anyone, even any man, teach your church, so you wouldn't want to let women teach the other women in your church unless you vet her. You evaluate her teaching materials. You observe some of what is being taught, just as you would a male teacher. Once you've determined that her teaching is sound and valuable, be supportive of her. Stick up for her if she faces unfair criticism, and vouch for her publicly and celebrate her efforts and results. There is a principle, I think, for this part of the time that we've had together, and the principle is the women's Bible study that thrives is one that is promoted and encouraged by the pastor. The women's Bible study that thrives is one that is promoted and encouraged by the pastor. So I would ask you, if you are interested in something like this, what will you do to ensure the biblical literacy of the women in your church? And what provision will you make to ensure that your women's Bible study is of good quality? Now, my last section that I want to go to is how to find and develop women leaders. And in your women's Bible study, which of the women really likes to dig and find answers? As I've mentioned before, those are the people who really are interested in the study. They dig for cross-references and extra information. But then, not just the interest in the Scripture. You don't want somebody who's all head knowledge, that just wants to pack it all in their head. Does she apply the Scripture to herself? Is she winsome with other women? Is she a leader of other women? And then be very careful of one who's more interested in information than in people. Then pray for wisdom, knowing who to consider teaching, because teaching Scripture is truly a calling. And then a pastor probably needs to cast vision. I know, as I've been leading women for so many years, that when you approach some people, and certainly some women, and say, I'd like for you to consider this position of leadership, many people will say, me? Oh no, I don't think I could do that. I mean, so you cast vision and express what you see in her. Express the things that you see that are positives so that she understands what you see. And then I think the pastor has to count the cost and consider the time investment that he makes in this woman who's going to be teaching. If you're going to put your money into something as an investment, you're going to consider, what is the return on my money? And the same thing needs to be true here. What is the return on the investment in a woman leader? Well, it's going to mean for investing in better families, investing in better marriages, in better child rearing techniques. It's investing in the maturity of the women of your church, rather than the kinds of women's groups that get together and they have flowers and candles and lots of food, and it isn't substantive. But the substance of the Scripture is what makes the difference for a women's group. And then help the woman to consider the cost as well. Help her to recognize if there is something else that she's doing that maybe she needs to not do, that maybe she needs to put down. Because if she's going to be teaching, she needs the time to study. So help the woman that you're bringing into leadership understand counting the cost of it and putting something else aside. Then any church that wants to have a thriving women's ministry has also got to help women find childcare. And so for daytime, women with children at home are going to need somebody, maybe of a different generation, that will be with the children. And in the evening, perhaps encouraging husbands to be involved in being with the children so that a wife can attend. And it's also very important for a women's Bible study to have someone who acts as an administrator, someone who takes care of the emailing and the announcements and the things like that, so that the woman who teaches doesn't have all the responsibility of it. Well, in conclusion, certainly common sense applies to your interactions with a possible woman teacher. We should certainly be wise about collaboration, but we can't be phobic about it. We must find ways to work together for the common good of the church. And I believe that every one of you here would like to see a thriving women's Bible study in your church. You want to see the lives of women change, that they'd be better wives, better mothers, be happier, be growing in the spiritual things. You want to see women learning to put faith before fear in their relationships with their husband, to balance work, ministry, and family, to support and love their husbands if they're married, and to know what it means to live sacrificially and satisfyingly. The Bible charges all believers, both men and women, to be part of God's kingdom work, and that means teaching and defending the truths of the Christian faith. Women teachers provide an indispensable layer of wisdom that men cannot without our example, our perspective, and our empathetic authority over women as women. We possess some lessons and weapons that men do not, and our contributions are needed. But women teachers need the help of male leadership to be in these positions. As those uniquely designed to speak truth to others of our gender, we need pastors who commit to help us handle the truth with the seriousness and the skill that it deserves. In doing so, you follow the example of the greatest teacher who walked the earth. And so I ask pastors, I say, help us help you. Give women a place to be equipped for the battle that we are both called to fight, to be armed for the watchtower we're both called to defend.